can. Can you hear me? Hi.
Can you see the people?
Yes,
We literally
there are
crowd
lots of people.
lots of people. Let us introduce ourselves. So, everyone, on the count of three, say your first name. One, two, three. Mackenzie!
Oh, that was great.
Awesome. Everyone, Dr. Brandon Waddles, will you first just tell them a snapshot about you? Who are you?
Hello, everybody. My name is Brandon Waddles. I presently serve as Director of Choral Activities and Assistant Professor of Vocal Music Education at Wayne State University, which is right in the heart of downtown Detroit, Michigan, which is where I am from. Grew up here, was born and reared in the Detroit public school system. Attended a high school by the name of Renaissance, which is a sort of academic and arts magnet. And that's really where I started singing in choir formally. Actually had no intention to be singing in choir. And from the first moment that I walked into that room, it changed my life, as I'm sure I think many of you are there for the same reason. And I was talking to some of my students yesterday about how music has sort of saved our lives on many days. And so my journey has been a series of zigzags from thinking that I was going to be a concert pianist to then thinking that I was going to be an operatic singer to then thinking that I was going to be a collaborative pianist working with operatic singers. And once again, never during this time did I think that I was going to actually be in the educational field as a choral conductor. Um, uh, and here I am today in the educational field as a choral conductor. And it has saved my life. In addition to that, which is sort of the crux of our conversation today, I have been working as a composer and arranger and a transcriber of Black sacred music, mainly, and an educator about that, I guess for the better part of 10 years, 10 to 15 years. And so that started at Morehouse College, where I got my bachelor's. Morehouse College is in Atlanta, Georgia. Certain alumni are Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Samuel L. Jackson, Spike Lee, Maynard Jackson, who was the first Black mayor of Atlanta, Georgia, and many others, P.J. Morton and others, and me. But anywho, and I started writing formally there. It was a great time. Morehouse is an all-male school. It is a historically Black college, and so I was able to experience a lot of things there. The advent of really learning more about Black sacred music, even though it had been part of my life all the time, to actually be educated about it is another thing. From there, I went to Westminster Choir College, which was a completely different experience, while equally important. Because this was a PWI, which we would call a predominantly white institution, academic institution, although it is a very much important in terms of choral music and music in the nation and in the world. There was a great lack of presence and knowledge about Black sacred music. And that was probably where my fight, I'll call it that, my fight to ensure that everybody understands what I'll talk about later, your right and your responsibility to some of this music, because it is distinctly American music. So I've carried that fight with me from, I would say from birth, but more knowledgeable and more conscious about it, especially when I got to Westminster, Florida State, where I received my doctorate, and henceforth. So I'm very excited to be here with you all today. I have to tell you all, if you don't already know, and I'm sure you already know, that Hope is a gem. And she is as much a lifesaver as Nina Scott was for me. Nina Scott was my high school choir director. So I just want you all to continue to love on her. Love on your lifesavers. That's going to be good. Somebody write that down. Love on your lifesavers.
I told you to have a pencil ready. Come on, somebody write that down. That's a good.
All right, that's my snapshot.
You're a sweet one. Thank you. And thank you for that thorough introduction because we have, I mean, we've said your name over and over. We've sung your music. We've all these things, and shame on us that we haven't met you yet. Let's just start by saying thank you to you for what you're giving us right now, for the song that you've given us that is on our lap. I don't know how we do that collectively, but go ahead. Thank you. And I think it's important that we say that first because just like we're having this conversation first, there are things that are more important than that music, which normally we don't say. But in this situation, absolutely. And so I say, in order to not waste time, we're just going to dive right in. We are people who love to talk and converse, and we're ready to hear. And we're friends now, and we're ready to go.
Great.
So I think I told you that Dr. Waddles read what you had to say. I didn't ask you for permission. You didn't say, whoa! Wait a minute. Whoa! So I didn't tell them, apparently. I didn't ask your permission, nor will I seek your forgiveness, because what was important about that is that it was raw and that it was real. And now some of you know why I nudged you to tweak just a little your sincerity, because I knew you would want to have done so for this moment. And when I read them, I was moved because of the varying answers and the importance and depth of them. And that's why immediately I forwarded them, because I knew that it was time for you to hear from him. And so honestly, I think I'm just going to turn it over to you and let you just talk to them.
Okay, good. So I want you all to understand that I, just as hopefully as we are called resident violence providers. That's what my students call me. They tell me that every day that I wake up and choose violence. And she chose violence. I immediately forwarding those responses to me, but I'm very grateful that she did. I'm very grateful for every last response that I read, and I read all of them. I read them the first time that she sent them, and I read them again today, just before I got on the Zoom call. So I want this to be dialogue, because I just want us to continue to be in conversation with each other past this moment, even if I am not there, I'm there in that score. So remember this, that there's a human in that score. And our job as musicians, as creatives, dealing with scores is to find who that human is and try and connect with that human. So I'm gonna be there with you, whether or not I'm looking you in your eyes or not. And so you're going to have to be consistently in conversation with me in that light. So I want us to get a better sense of each other through this conversation. Someone tell me what the historical background of the Negro spiritual is. Where is that rooted in time? Okay. So.
So, as far as I'm aware, it's.
Why don't you're gonna have to take your mask down to speed real quick.
As far as I'm aware, and what we've always been taught through choir and stuff like that, is that these traditional Negro spirituals were always used as a way of keeping up morale and generally just looking towards a better light during times of slavery and
right.
Like that.
So this would be, thank you, very correct. And mind you, the spirituals are the definitive and first religious form of music from the African-American experience. That's important to realize because there is religious music of a form in Africa that happens. And mind you, our first form of influence upon this music, the American or traditional Negro spiritual, is from African music and culture. And you are exactly right. A lot of times this music was utilized, and we're talking about the raw folk spiritual as it was sung in the plantations or in the invisible church, as Dr. Eileen Southern would refer to it. They were to sometimes build up morale. Sometimes they were used as code. Wade in the water, children. God's going to trouble the water. Well, God troubling the water was simply that. If the enslaved Africans running away, if they were trying to reach freedom, if you got in the water, it will trouble the water such that the dogs, the hound dogs wouldn't be able to catch the scent. So that's code. Or follow the drinking gourd. What is the drinking gourd? The Big Dipper. It's a constellation of stars. That was the enslaved Africans' form of being able to root themselves up north. My home, Deep River, my home is over Jordan. Now the Jordan River is, of course, from spiritual context, from scriptural context. But for the enslaved African, it was really like the Mississippi River. You crossed over the Mississippi River, you were headed on your way up north into freedom. So there's also code. So there's morale. There's code for freedom's sake. And then, you know, when we get into the individuality of it, so there are larger songs that deal maybe with more of a group aesthetic, but I also think about some of the more intimate and individual songs. For every song that a group of people may have created, you know, via the invisible church or via in the plantation, there was also somebody that just had to moan something to themselves in their own private space. Now, when I talk to you all about where, in what time period the spiritual arrives, you'll have to know I was not born in that time for me to be here with you all today. So what happens is, historically, after the end of slavery, formally in 1865, you have the Reconstruction period. And what you have are a number of different arrangers that take the folk spiritual, the raw spiritual as they knew it, and put it into a more classicized format. What you have in front of you today is a spiritual arrangement. I have not written the spiritual. I have arranged actually two different spirituals. I'm gonna sing all along the way. And then He's Just the Same Today is the one that's in the middle in that very interesting meter that I apologize to you all beforehand. So I have taken two spirituals and arranged them in a form. Mind you, some of the earlier arrangers of spirituals like Harry T. Burleigh, R. Nathaniel Dett, John Work, while they may not have been slaves themselves, they had closer connection to parents and grandparents or otherwise that were enslaved Africans. I am even more far removed from that experience. So I say this to you to say, what even is my right to the spiritual? And that's a huge question. And I want you to know that that question needs to be asked not only by African Americans, but by everybody that's living in America and everybody outside of America that sings it. What is my right to it? Well, Antonin Dvorak, who was a wonderful composer from across the sea, he came to America and he was working on, a new symphony. He called it the New World Symphony. And he was looking for what the sound of American music is. And he ended up meeting up with Harry T. Burleigh. And when Harry T. Burleigh began to sing, because Harry T. Burleigh was actually not only a wonderful composer and arranger, he was a brilliant singing baritone. He was a concert baritone. And he began to sing and play through some of these original folk melodies. And he said, that's the sound. He said, this is the sound of America. And if we are all Americans, and this is the American sound, and none of us None of us here living today have the experience of the enslaved Africans that created them. And then therein, it is the gift of American music, because music should be seen as a gift. It is the gift that has been given to us as a right to sing. Now, the other portion that comes with that is the responsibility unto it. For every gift that you get, I'm really hoping that I'm able to gift myself with a PS5 this Christmas. We'll see how that turns out. Once I get that gift, if I do, my responsibility unto it is, of course, to take care of it, make sure that it's properly maintained, and to also balance that out with my work schedule. So that's things that I'm thinking about right now. I know that that's crazy to try and relate that to this, but I promise I'm gonna make it make sense. Once you have received the gift and you have a right unto it, you have a responsibility unto that music. Everybody living in America has a responsibility to understand the intent behind the spiritual as it was initially created, and then to connect it to your lived experience today. For me not to have had the experience of an enslaved African, I have to understand what the original intent behind spirituals were. And we've talked about that, building up morale, code, being able to utilize, African culture and tradition and mix it with what I'll call Black Christianity, and fuse it into a socio-cultural aesthetic. So that's my understanding historically of how the spiritual was created. How do I connect that today? Well, even if I think about an individual's take on that, all I'm talking about is going to sing along the way. Anybody in a choral experience now that dealt without during the pandemic should have a reason to sing. That is an individual, intimate experience that everybody in that room should have. So here now I have mixed originally because they had to find a reason to sing. No different from the scriptures that talked about, when they said that they were bonded in captivity and their captors asked them to sing for them songs. And they said, how can we sing these songs in a strange land? That is just the experience of the enslaved Africans, who had to sing not only through the transatlantic when they were making their way over to America, or when they got to America. And remember that many of these enslaved Africans were coming from different tribes, so they had different dialects and different languages. And the only thing that connected them was the universal language of music. And that's no different from today. That many of us can go all over the world and connect to the spiritual, as we can connect to Brahms, as we can connect to the Beatles, as we can connect to Beyonce, as we can connect to Lady Gaga. So within that, you have a right and you have a responsibility to it. So talk to me. What have we gathered from that? Tell me what your thoughts are. Well, I would love for you to. I'm a bit hard of hearing. I'm so sorry.
This one?
Hi.
Hi.
I feel like with the concept of a right to a responsibility, we also have a responsibility to do right by the music. I think it's such a cool way, and it's such a really enveloping way to say that, because I think the big thing, when we as a choir have had these kinds of conversations about what is appropriate to say, what will correctly honor the music in the way that we intend to, that's really what it's
all about. Like, we want to do right by the music. We want to give it as much heart and emotion from the most sincere place we can, but we don't always know where that place is.
Yeah.
And I just think, like, a right to a responsibility is the most succinct, really most contained way I've ever heard it said, and I think that's really cool.
Oh, thank you. That came after many, many moons of having to talk this talk. So I want you to stay there, and you have inspired something else from me. So right and responsibility also gives us opportunity. So it's not just a task. It's like, oh my God, with this great gift, I have the chance, I have the opportunity to not only do right by the music, but remember that I said that there's a human in that score.
Yeah.
I have a chance to do right by that human. And so one of the things that was told to me right before we started school last year, right before we started school in the pandemic, my dear friend, Dr. Brandon Boyd, who's at University of Missouri, he said, Brandon, he said, we've got to be concerned more so with process rather than product. He said, so many times in the choral realm or otherwise, especially in academic institutions, we are so focused on just getting notes and rhythms right for a concert. We'll spend weeks and weeks, hours and hours, days and days getting ready for a 45 to an hour-long concert. What have we gathered in terms of process during that time? And so the pandemic sat folk down so that they could talk more than they sang, so that they could listen more than they sight read. And so now here, as we are transitioning out into a new, because it is new, and I don't want it to be just like it was before. I would hope that nobody would want to just go back to what was. I want to press forward in a new, learning some of the stuff that I learned about myself during the pandemic, learning some of the things that I learned about each other. I hope that you all want the same thing so that you have an opportunity that every time that you look in a score, if I am to firmly get through Die schöne Müllerin of Schubert, or if I'm supposed to make it through Winterreise of Robert Schumann, you know, these are art song leader sets that soloists would sing. There's a human in that score. There's no difference from, I'm tossed in this wide world alone. I've heard of a city called heaven. I've started to make it my home. Who is that human? How do you connect to that human? That is not solely slavery minded in a contemporary context. That's just somebody feeling disconnected from everything. Everybody in that room felt that. I felt it. Yes, I felt it all last week. I told Hope, I said, November, I said, Mercury is in retrograde, Gatorade, and everything else. And so when I have those experiences, one of the first things that I can do is sometimes is I'll go sing a hymn, or I'll go sing a spiritual, or I'll sit at the piano, because music was that lifesaver, and I found a human in there. And maybe that human is you. Did that bell ding just at that?
Yeah.
Enough said. Thank you. I appreciate it. That was so good.
Anybody else? You want someone else?
Yeah, let's do some. Let's do one more.
Who else got something to say? Come on, make it raw. Let's go. Come on. Get up there, Emily.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. I don't
Okay,
think
yeah.
Yep, you're good.
I'm gonna stand because I'm too short to kneel. So I think, especially listening to your whole speech about doing, of like, we have a right to the music and stuff like that. But then also we have this responsibility. I know, at least personally for me, when Milthaler told us originally about this, that, oh, Dr. Waddles has made this really, really lovely spiritual for us, and I was like, you do realize we're a very, like, literally exclusively, like, white choir in the middle of Ohio. I feel like this, in a way, it was very, like, I felt as almost if I was, like, disrespecting the culture that the music had come from, and I think hearing what you had to say, I'm starting to realize, like, why it isn't a bad thing that we're singing these songs, but that we have a responsibility to sing these songs with honor, know where they came from, and connect them to our own, what our own experiences and what we've been through.
Yeah. And I love that you're able to connect it to what you've been through, because you are a human that's going to be living in that score. There's no reason that you should sing anything if you can't place yourself in it. There's no how am I to place myself into the gypsy songs of Brahms? I ain't no gypsy. I'm not German. I have to find something that connects me to it. That connects me to it. You may be connected by that melody. Everybody just loves a good melody. You may be connected. I get connected to Brahms just by his use of harmony and structure. You know, I get connected to Bach because I think he was one of the first great jazz boppers of all time. He was an improviser above all improvisers. You know, and I connect to him that way. So here's what happens. A lot of times we will disassociate ourselves from a genre or a form of music because we feel that we can't connect to it, or we just feel that it would be better served by having whoever is indigenous to that genre to sing it. The only thing that we're doing when we do that is almost negating the existence and the necessity of its continuity. So, you know, I'm talking about rhythm and blues in my African-American music history class. And for a long time, those songs were not played on majority and popular airwaves because people felt that music was solely relegated to what were called race records, specifically for Black consumption in urban and lesser than communities. And we don't even really get R&B on a large frame until we get to like Motown. And then think about how when MTV started, that they were barely going to be showing any music videos from Black artists. And this is the 80s, not until we get to MJ with Thriller, you know? So all of that, when they thought that they were saying, oh, you know, this would really be great for you all. No, they were negating the existence of it and the necessity of it, because MJ is just as much American music as is Duke Ellington, as is Gaga, as is Amy Winehouse, as is Taylor Swift, as is Aretha Franklin, as are the Clark sisters, as are Thomas Whitfield, as is the spiritual, as is country, as is the blues, as is rock and roll. And if I really wanted to take you all through a history lesson, I'll tell you how the spiritual connects to every single one of those genres that I just talked about.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think we would all sit here and let you do that for the next 5 hours.
Oh, Lord. If I could, I would. I've got to go teach vocal ped students. So fun. Yes. And it's so interesting because our conversation today is about the evolution of choral sound. The evolution of choral sound. So they're going to be bringing in excerpts of what Westminster Choir used to sound like back in the early 20s, or St. Olaf, or Concordia, you know, all of those early stalwarts of choral sound in America. And then they'll bring in some Robert Shaw, but they've also got to bring in some Eva Jesse. They've also got to bring in Hall Johnson. Eva Jesse was the choral director, the chorus master for the first production of Porgy and Bess, the George Gershwin opera that details Black life in South Carolina, the islands in South Carolina. And it's so important because Eva Jesse was a very well-respected chorus master, a Black female chorus master in the 30s and 40s, who was serving as a chorus master for major operatic productions. That is huge. Had a trained chorus of all Black singers. And she really helped write Porgy and Bess because George Gershwin, as a white Jewish man, was trying to interpret what the Black experience was on Kittiwah Island in South Carolina. And she said, baby, that's not how Black folk pray. And he said, how? He said, how, Miss Jessie? And she said, look at this. And he looked and listened and he started writing. So sound has so much evolved from that space to where it was in the 50s to where it is now. And it will continue to evolve. Our concept of what the spiritual should be, even as an arrangement, has evolved. Even when I was in high school, spiritual arrangements with piano were seen as like, what's the word? Taboo. They were seen as a bad thing because they felt that the spiritual should as much relate to its original stance. But I'll tell you this, one of the only reasons that the enslaved Africans did not use instruments is because they didn't have a piano to play on. Most of those instruments were taken from them. It was not for not wanting to, it was just for practical reasons. And if the spiritual is to have been the mother, father of jazz, blues, gospel, rock and roll, rap, hip hop, R&B, soul, Motown, all of those genres continue to influence each other and they influence the spiritual. So in mine, you're gonna hear Black musical theater, you're gonna hear gospel, you're gonna hear jazz, you're gonna hear some very African-esque, riffs, melismas of sorts. It's all in there. Find that human. That human is everybody. We don't just listen to the same thing every day. We're all over the place. I know I am. I don't know what I'm going to listen to when I get in the car.
Yeah. Sometimes it needs to be nothing.
Yeah. All right. I'm done teacher talking. Sorry.
No. I think I was just getting ready to say, I'm pretty sure Dr. Waddles needs to be the one to teach you the spiritual. And I'm only halfway kidding. Obviously, that's not truly possible. But I think it's going to be, and I know you feel this too after this time together, it's going to be grossly important that he be involved in that teaching process to a certain degree. Not because I cannot channel him, but why should I? If we have him, and that is a gift. That is a gift. And so we can at least get closer to fulfilling that sincerity and the honoring because he can better connect us to that. Are there any burning questions before we leave kind of this space? Because the next time we meet, it'll probably be musical. We'll be focusing on that. While we're in this space, we have 10 whole minutes, as long as he does. We have 10 whole minutes. What is burning in there that you're going to wish you had asked this human when you leave this room? You may
It can be about anything.
It can be about anything. Uh-oh. He's not kidding. Do you want? Yeah.
I have a quick question. It's totally off topic, but do you know Dr. James Jordan?
Jimmy J. Yes, I do know Dr. James Jordan. That's so funny. I just pulled this out. Of my library to bring to. So towards the second half of my vocal ped program, we start to talk about actually like building choirs and building choir sound. He was a teacher of mine, so I did my master's at Westminster, and then I taught there on the conducting faculty for 3 years. So He is a colleague. He was also one of the first to publish my arrangements of spirituals and continues to do so with BIA. So I am very indebted to him. So I consider him a great mentor and a close friend. Yeah.
Emma, tell them why you asked briefly.
Oh, okay, because I went to Westminster Choir College, like the vocal institute.
Yeah.
Yeah, for summer. So.
Which summer did you go?
Well, it was. Well, there were like 4 summers that I went.
Oh, okay. So you would have been there with people like Dr. Jason Vodka. I'm not sure if Dr. Amanda Quist was still there.
Yeah, she actually was my latest like choir like teacher kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She's a dear friend as well. She's at my University of Miami now. Miami Frost. Yeah, absolutely. It's a great vocal institute. Everybody should go. Everybody should go. Yeah.
Reagan, did you have your hand up?
I was gonna ask what your favorite color.
I think you need to get close. If you're gonna mumble like you normally, this is my child. Get up there and say hello.
Ha 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 ha.
Hi.
Hello. Oh, that's funny.
I was gonna ask your favorite color.
My favorite color. I have 3, blue, green, and purple. I'm not wearing any of them today, but yeah. Thank you.
Please sit down. Who has a burning question?
That was burning.
Not a question, but it's a comment.
Get up, Eric.
Hey.
Okay. So I just wanted to say like thank you because you really like said something about being connected and like with like everybody in like past generations in the entire world. I just kind of been like thinking about how music is like one of the only things that really connects us in that way.
Mhm.
Especially like during the pandemic, it like helped us all get through it, I think so.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's so, first of all, thank you. I think there's something so interesting about so many of us in the pandemic felt this need to just go back and listen to older music, you know? There was a great sense of nostalgia reaching back for like, oh, those were simpler times. But, you know, from simpler times comes timeless music. Like that stuff still works. Like the spiritual is a timeless genre. It will always be relevant. It will always be relevant. Good music is always going to be relevant, you know? So I love this. And you said a great thing about being able to connect to the past, and you're not only connecting to the past as like a history fact, but you're connecting to the people that were there. Think about the people that were there. And then, you know, now you can connect it to your present. And then what's your legacy? What do you leave behind with that music for somebody that's going to come 10, 15 years later and has their own reality to think about? Yeah, it's good. Thank you.
Yes.
Can I?
Yes.
Okay.
Ah,
Yeah, right. Hi, Dr. Waddles.
hello.
So in our current state of culture, there's a lot of talk around like appropriation versus what we've been talking about today with like honor, respect. Can you talk at all a little bit about like your thoughts and views on that?
Yeah.
What if a choir, for instance, I'll just bring it home to here, not for this choir, but our men's chorus right now is working on Bethlehemu, which I'm sure you're very familiar with from being from Morehouse. There is the idea there that, sometimes we see choirs that will adapt movement into that. Just kind of want to look at your thoughts on viewpoints on that.
Yeah, clearly, if you've seen Bethlehemu as performed by the Morehouse College Glee Club, There is choreography that has very much evolved over time. It is not necessarily the same choreographed movement as it was in the late 60s when they first started performing it. I believe that with everything, so the issue of appropriation, I think mainly comes in when people do not have proper historical intent. I do believe that spiritual should be sung with great energy and great joy. Sometimes when there is an overt level of choreography that distracts from the story, If I think about the fact that in many experiences that the spiritual may have been sung in the plantation, meaning that it was a working song, then that gives me a sense of what the rhythmic impulse and intent of it would be. That tells me what I might be doing with my hands or what I might not be doing with my hands. We also need to have a very good mind that after slavery, after the end of slavery, during the Reconstruction era, and certainly forward, you have this period called minstrelsy. And minstrelsy is probably was at that time the most popular form of entertainment at the time. However, while that has influenced everything from TV and film to music theater, you had a number of different complications that arose in terms of choreographing the Black experience. Once again, now that at that particular time was used for comedic intent. So you need to be mindful of, like I said, your right and your responsibility to it. Part of that is, what were the purpose of these spirituals? What were the purpose of these spirituals? Look at the message. Look at and some of that comes from scriptural stories. Some of that comes from more individual laments, the sorrow songs of sorts. And I think if you really have a good idea historically about what the intent was, there'll never be, an issue with appropriation. In terms of choreography for Bethlehemu, I would always say to go back to the source. So I would look and check on a couple of different Morehouse Glee Club, videos that are very much available online to make sure that they sort of fall in line with that. Yeah, a great question. It comes up a lot. So historical intent.
That covers that whole discussion. It uses Bethlehemu as an example, but it covers way more and beyond music. It covers way beyond music, that answer. Yeah. Oh my goodness. So we could talk to you for hours. Clearly none of us can do that. Our bell is about to ring. I was wondering if we could finish just by, can we all gather around Dr. Waddles for a photo? I know you want that. We need to mark this moment in time as the beginning of a relationship. So let's get a snapshot. Put your arms around it.
Okay, we gotta make sure there's a space that we can see him. And I'm actually gonna move our laptops.
Okay.
If Mr. Miller were here, yeah, this is gonna feel really weird for you. Just stare straight ahead. I'll tell you when to smile.
Okay, and I'll do a couple because I need to do both ways.
And make sure, okay, yes. All right. If you're willing to unmask, we would love for you to, so we can see your smiling face. If not, that's totally cool.
All right. Again, there's gonna be a couple here, so here we go. 1, 2, 3, stay there, stay there. 1, 2, 3. And 1, 2, 3. And 76. Okay, good.
Awesome. What do we say? Thank you. Get up in those video things and say hello and say goodbye. And we'll see you soon.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you so much. You have such a wonderful way with words. It's really
Oh
inspiring.
gosh, thank you so much. Thank you.
I'm the soprano. Hi, it's me.
It's
He
a-
knows who I am. No, I've talked to him before. We're
Hey,
besties.
hey.
We're besties.
We're besties now.